So one of the biggest issues this news outlet has been covering for the last few years, in fact, is medical marijuana. And the debate over medical marijuana reached a flashpoint in the South Carolina House of Representatives just last week. A bill that originated in the Senate, S-150, with overwhelming support, was killed in the House via a procedural gimmick. That has outraged advocates on this issue who believe that the House didn't want to address the issue, didn't want to pass this bill, even though the votes for medical marijuana were ostensibly there in the House. We covered that issue extensively last week. We addressed it in detail in our Week in Review segment. But this week we wanted to take another tack. We wanted to pull the lens back on this issue and talk to someone who's been involved from the very beginning, who not only knows this fight on a policy and legal level, but also on a very deeply personal level. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you, our viewers, one of my dear friends, Jill Swing. Jill comes from Charleston. She is someone who has been at the State House, again, for the better part of the last decade, fighting for this bill. And Jill, you've got a reason that you're pushing this, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, Will. And thank you so much for asking me to be here and to share a different perspective, the patient perspective, which is very important. Obviously, the key focus of this legislation is helping patients. And I became involved in this 8 years ago. I have a daughter, Mary Louise, who has severe intractable epilepsy and cerebral palsy, and her seizures are very severe. At one point, she was having 800 to 1,000 seizures a day. At this point, some of those higher frequency seizures have diminished to some point. However, she now has tonic-clonic seizures, which can cause brain damage and even death. So obviously, this is a very serious matter for my family. And about 8 years ago, her neurologist said that they had really run out of treatment options. There weren't any other pharmaceutical drugs that were worth trying. We had tried special diets. We'd seen specialists up and down the East Coast. And so we started looking at alternatives. And in that search, we found out that cannabis, particularly the part of the cannabis that is higher in CBD or cannabidiol, could be of benefit to patients with epilepsy. And so I got involved originally with the 2014 Cbd Bill that was introduced also by bill sponsor Senator Tom Davis. And we were able to get that bill passed. However, what that bill did was it allowed patients with severe intractable epilepsy who had a doctor's letter stating that they did indeed have intractable epilepsy and that they might benefit from using CBD. It allowed us to possess CBD oil, but it didn't provide us with a source. And so what we found, what that did essentially was it forced moms like me onto the black market to get medication for their chronically ill children. And anybody who has been in a situation where they've had to get medication from the illicit market, that is no place you want to be for a loved one and certainly for a special needs child. So we formed this network of moms and parents really across the country who were in the same boat because this seemed to be a trend right around that time. And this was before hemp was really legalized and in production to make these higher CBD products. And we were sold products that we didn't even know whether they were fit for human consumption, let alone whether they would have any therapeutic benefits. And it was terrifying. And we had, some children who had, negative impacts because of that situation. And so what I learned from that was that really every state is an island, and that what we needed was a comprehensive medical cannabis program within the state of South Carolina so that patients could have safe legal access to cannabis products, be it CBD or, whatever the therapeutic benefits of the varying cannabinoids, including THC, in our state. And so that's what I've been fighting for now since 2015. So think about it, my daughter was 6 years old when I started this fight, and she's 14 now. So this is over half of her life that I've been trying to get legal access to medical cannabis for my daughter and for patients like her who could benefit.
Right. And you mentioned one of the things that you mentioned there, I wanted to draw attention to the law enforcement folks we speak with. They talk about the dangers of the illicit market, the black market, and how we need standardized products so people know what they're getting. If I heard you correctly, you're fine with that.
I agree.
You just want
Yes.
access.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I'm glad that law enforcement sees that as an issue and a concern because we, have patients who are getting medications. Like I said, they don't really know what they're getting. I had a patient who reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and said that she moved here from another state. She's getting her where she was a medical card-carrying medical patient. She has since moved to South Carolina and has had to turn to the illicit market. And she was sexually assaulted when she went to obtain her medication from her dealer. And she couldn't report it because she said, "What do I do? I was doing something illegal, and this happened." And it's something she'd never even shared with anybody. And I think that lawmakers and law enforcement need to understand that this is a real problem and a danger to patients who are already in a compromised position with their health, and then they're putting themselves at risk in trying to obtain the only thing that might give them some relief from their conditions.
And it's, obviously not just stories like yours, being a mom with a child who has this need for medical cannabis, but also, Senator Richardson's wife that gave the testimony about the chronic pain that she deals with. You've got soldiers coming back with PTSD. It's a whole range of people that could benefit. Is that accurate?
Correct. And so going back to 2014, the Cbd Bill created a medical marijuana study committee, and I participated in that. And we heard testimony. We went around the state and heard testimony from, dozens and dozens of patients who need medical cannabis. And then obviously just over the years, in 8 years, I've been contacted by patients. I work with patients. I now actually have formed an educational organization called SC Compassionate Care Alliance, and we help educate patients not only on the benefits of medical cannabis, but also on how to become their own advocate, because I want them to have the same experience that I had. And I've learned that, like, so many patients don't know, like, who their lawmakers even are, who they are, let alone, like, how to contact them.
Right.
So, just educating patients on the legislative process and who they need to contact, who they need to reach out to, has just been an important part of my own advocacy and just educating other patients.
Well, let's talk about that legislative process for a moment. South Carolina is advancing, or at least was advancing in the General Assembly this year, a very limited medical cannabis program. In fact, this bill that Senator Davis has sponsored is more limited even than the Mississippi program, which was extremely limited. I think there's about a dozen qualifying conditions for folks that want to be able to have access to medical cannabis. So it's a very narrowly drawn bill. The delivery method is also very tightly regulated. Pharmacists, registered dispensaries, everything's very regulated. Overwhelming support in the Senate. Passed overwhelmingly. There's overwhelming public support. And the votes for passage were there in the South Carolina House of Representatives. So what happened? Why are we still talking about a bill that hasn't passed yet?
It's a great question, Will. And, it's so unfortunate what happened. Obviously, the opposition was going to do everything they could to try to stop this bill from happening, to stop it from advancing. And I was told that there were over 1,000 amendments on the desk that were introduced really just to slow down the process of the debate on the bill. But unfortunately, they didn't even get that far. And there were, we were told in advance that there were some procedural things that they were going to try to do to stop the bill from even being debated. And one of those tactics, it seems, ended up working, and that was the effort to declare that the bill was unconstitutional because it was a revenue bill and it should have originated in the House of Representatives instead of originating in the Senate. Now, keep in mind, this very issue was discussed on the Senate floor during the Senate debate, and it was determined by the Senate that this was not a problem, that there is a sales tax component to the bill, and that sales tax is ancillary and is not the purpose of the bill is not for generating revenue. And so if you go to the, I have it.
You can feel free to look at your notes, not a problem.
Look at my notes because I'd rather read it.
I like those glasses, by the way.
Yes, thank you. They're very, fancy, expensive dollar store glasses. So if you look at what our opposition is claiming. So in the rules of the House, we'll start there. Rule 5.3 of the House states that any bill or resolution considered by the House of Representatives upon second reading, which was where we were, by the way, we were at second reading on this bill last week,
which is passage of the bill. That's effectively the reading that passes it.
So every bill, just for those who aren't familiar, they have to have third reading. The first reading is when it's read across the desk and assigned to a committee. And we can get to this later, but keep in mind when they say it should have originated in the House, there is a House version of this bill.
Right.
They chose not to take it up. So for them to say it should have originated in the House, okay, it did.
It's a BS argument.
It did, but okay, whatever. Okay, but anyway, upon second reading, that raises revenue must conform to the provisions of Article 3, Section 15 of the South Carolina Constitution. Okay, correct, got that. Okay, so then we go to Article 3, Section 15, which states bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but may be amended, rejected, et cetera, by the Senate. So basically, bills for raising revenue. Now, is this bill a bill for raising revenue? I would say not. This is a bill for creating a medical cannabis program. It does have a revenue component to it, sure, but that is secondary to the purpose of the bill. And then I know that Tommy Pope mentioned something about the tax, and that because it has a tax, I guess he looked at the case law, which, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a lawmaker, I'm just a mom. So, I've studied this to the best of my ability. I have not gone back and reviewed all of the case law, but I am very familiar with the bill. I mean, Representative McGravy, who first introduced this point of order on the floor, raising the question of the constitutionality of the bill. I spoke with him the week before this bill came up, and he said, well, I've studied this in depth for the last 2 to 3 months. Well, I've studied in depth for the last 8 years. So I'm not saying I know everything. I'm not an attorney, but I know what the bill says, and the bill does have a tax component to it, but that is not the primary purpose of the bill. And it has a sales tax, and it has a sales tax. I don't think that the tax is not an additional tax. If it had said they're imposing a tax, then yes, that would imply that this tax is a special tax. But it's the sales tax, and then it just denotes where that sales tax is going to go, because it's not going to just go straight to the general fund where other sales taxes go. And it's also not the purpose of funding the program. So when I've gone back and listened multiple times to Speaker Pro Tem Tommy Pope's ruling and why he feels like the tax is the reason why the bill is unconstitutional, he says that the bill levies tax taxes in the strictest sense of the word. It is not incidental. It is a core ingredient. It follows the definitions and it establishes a separate tax to create the whole infrastructure for the marijuana program. And therefore, he sustained the point of order. But that's not correct. So the tax does not in any way establish it does not create the whole infrastructure for the marijuana program. And so I pulled up the language directly from the bill, which is, for those who are following along, Section 4453-2350, which says that the department shall promulgate regulations to, and if you go down to number 10, it says establish reasonable application and renewal fees for medical cannabis establishments, which must generate revenues sufficient to offset all of the expenses of implementing and administering this article. So that is where the money comes from to create the whole infrastructure for the marijuana program, not the tax. So the tax is therefore incidental.
I have to ask you this: are you sure you're not a lawyer?
Yes.
Because if you were arguing that in a court, I think you'd win. And I want to point out something to the folks who are watching. A lot of the people who supported this procedural gimmick in the South Carolina House, they were criticizing those of us who have been advocating for medical marijuana, saying we don't know what we're talking about from a legal perspective. But Jill, the position that you just articulated, chapter and verse, through the bill, through the statutes, it is the position not only of the Senate's legal counsel, it's the position of the Supreme Court in multiple rulings, and it was the position of the South Carolina Attorney General's office when they addressed this in an opinion back in 2015. Solicitor Bob Cook, in fact, pulled an Alabama case as the standard that South Carolina should use and basically said, like you said, if it is a revenue bill, if it is a tax bill, then yes, something like that has to originate in the House. But if it's a bill for something else that includes a tax component, well, that can originate in either chamber. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of laws on the books right now that have revenue components that originate in the Senate. So, again, this is Pandora's box that Tommy Pope has opened, potentially thousands of court challenges over these laws. Let me ask you.
And I just have to question too. The presiding speaker, pro tem Tommy Pope, had his name as a co-sponsor to all 1,000 plus amendments that had been laid on the desk.
So he had a position.
So, I have to question, just based purely on the facts, I have to question his motivation and if his opinion was biased. Again, that's not my place to make that judgment, but just based on reading the information, his ruling was not correct, in my opinion. So I don't know, what happens beyond that. But
well, it sounds like it was worse than that. It sounds like not only was his ruling incorrect on the constitutional challenge, but it sounds like he misstated, as you pointed out, what the bill does. So not only did he get the wrong ruling, he's misrepresenting what the law says.
Right. And I mean, I guess, nobody bothered to mention Section 2350 or 2340, whichever one it was. And maybe, McGravy gave him that information and, but I think that this is an important ruling and he should have studied the bill a little bit more in depth.
And you, I spoke with you after that bill and you referenced Representative McGravy and you said that his efforts to quash the bill were an insult to you and to a lot of the other folks who have fought for this legislation. And I guess my question now would be, what's next? Where do we go from here? If this kind of procedural nonsense is what's going to block it, how do we get around that?
Well, and I don't know. Again, I'm not a lawmaker, but I mean, I've had some of the allies in the legislature say, Jill, we've got 3 more days. We've got 3 more days of session. A lot can happen in three days. And I just have to have faith that our allies are going to do everything humanly possible to find a way, to find a path, to assure that that patients, like my daughter, don't have to wait another year or another 2 years of a 2-year session to see this bill through.
You've waited long enough, haven't you?
Yeah, we've waited long enough, and we've lost advocates, we've lost patients along the way, and I don't want to lose any more, So I hope that that there is a way, and I hope that there is a will to see this through in the next 3 days, because I don't give up until I have to give up. And I've got 3 more days. But after that, I think that that we have to look at these votes, and we have to say we've got, this is an election year, and a lot of members are saying, well, I don't want to vote on this in an election year. Well, you just voted. And so now I think they know where we stand, and I really hope that people will look at those votes and vote accordingly when they go to the polls.
Let me ask you one other question. There's a group just formed. They came to my news outlet looking for publicity, a group called the Freedom Caucus. We wrote a nice article on them, gave them the publicity they wanted. And then 10 of the 13 members of that group voted to sustain Speaker Pro Tempore Pope's ruling on this. When you hear a Freedom Caucus taking such an anti-freedom position, how does that make you feel?
It's frightening, Will. To me, it's actually frightening. I actually attended a freedom rally here at the State House a few weeks ago, put on by many of the members of this group. And they talked a lot about medical freedom. And I'm sure that was brought on by, COVID and a lot of things that happened that were scary. Thoughts of, forced vaccines and mask mandates and prohibiting doctors from utilizing medications that they felt might be of benefit to their patients who were suffering from the symptoms of COVID. And it caused quite an uprising among those who really believe in freedom and medical freedom. But if you look at those votes, like you said, the Freedom Caucus only believes in medical freedom as they define it. And when you talk about somebody who only believes in freedom as they define it, that is the antithesis of freedom. Okay? So I think it's frightening, and I think it becomes more about control than it does about freedom. And freedom is just nothing more than a publicity stunt. And so I hope that those folks in particular take a deep, hard look at what their motivation is and where their hearts are and what they really believe. Because if they really believe in freedom, they would do everything in their power to allow doctors to have the freedom to provide the best course of treatment for their patients. And medical cannabis is not for everybody, but in many cases it is. And the doctors should have the freedom to be able to make that decision on behalf of their patients.
And once again, the key word there, freedom.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks put labels on themselves, and unfortunately, in far too many cases, particularly in South Carolina, they don't live up to those labels. So, well, Julie, we're going to hold that caucus accountable. We're going to continue to hold the legislature accountable as this issue moves forward. Wish you the best of luck over the next 3 days. Hope some of these efforts, in fact, one of the efforts we heard about, folks are going to try to put the medical marijuana legislation onto some existing pharmacy bills in the hopes that they'll pass through the Senate, which has already, again, supported medical marijuana overwhelmingly. But Jill, thank you so much for coming by today, for sharing your experiences, and for giving us this peek into the details of this this travesty that took place last week. And I really hope that moving forward, we can get this bill passed because, like you say, it's just so important to so many people.
Yep. Well, and thank you, Will, for just for keeping an eye on it over the years, and for your support. So, and thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely. We'll keep doing it. Thank you, Jill.
All right.
All right.